Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. We're greatly honored today to be joined by Gary Williams. Gary is the founder of an organization called Better Future International, where he helps purpose-driven leaders and organizations to gain clarity through leveraging their unique personality types. And he's driven by a purpose to inspire others to stop and think so that we can imagine a better future. He's also the best-selling author of a book called Choose Your Best Life. And we will discuss a little bit about that book and some of the very key words that he uses in that book. I'm sure that this is going to be an amazing session that you're going to learn a lot from. Gary is an MBTI certified practitioner who also uses things like the Clifton's Strengths Finder to help people to find their uniqueness and then put that to best practice around their purpose. So Gary, great privilege to have you on the show today. Please say hello to our audience and share with us a little bit more of your background and what led you into this type of work.
Absolutely. Well, Mick, thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm so excited for today's conversation. And to you listening, thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm excited to dig in today's conversation. And so just kind of the 30,000 foot view of my journey here. I actually started my professional journey as a teacher. I was in the world of public education. I started in an urban environment. So I was a teacher in Detroit, Michigan, and taught middle school math. And after just a couple years in the saddle there, was one of the most experienced teachers in the building because I worked in a school that had a really high turnover rate and actually was then an instructional coach for novice teachers. So I worked with kindergarten through 8th grade teachers to help them become better at their art and their craft at what they do. From there, I did some more teaching out in the suburbs of Detroit, and then ultimately was a dean of students. So was responsible for student discipline, school culture, school climate, and trying to make sure that it was a safe and productive learning environment for everyone. From that position, I learned that I loved working one-on-one with people. Even in those challenging conversations of discipline, right? Of kids that were sent down to the office for behavioral reasons, that were demonstrating some challenging behaviors, I loved them. I loved working one-on-one with people to dig into what was actually going on there. But I was ready to do it in a little bit more of a positive environment. So I started coaching authors, working through the process of people writing and publishing books. And then from there, founded my own company where now I do just what you described, helping people to get unstuck, to really lean into their uniqueness through their personality and their purpose. And I do that both through one-on-one coaching and team facilitations, looking at team dynamics and what's going on within an organization to hopefully streamline communication and make things just more productive and efficient for everyone.
That's great, Gary. And thanks for that excellent introduction. Let's start with the purpose element because that's probably where it needs to start for a lot of people. I think you and I are quite lucky here. I worked out my own personal why close to 15 years ago. It's evolved a little, but hasn't changed, but it's just evolved a little in how it kind of comes to life. But I've known my personal why for quite some time. You're very forward in telling people what your purpose is. What advice could you give to people in our audience that hear this? They hear about find your purpose, find your why, but they don't know where to start.
Yeah, beautiful question. So here's what I know and here's what I believe. Every single person on our planet has a unique purpose. They have a unique why. And it's been with you your entire life. Whether you have awareness around what it is or not, it's with you. So it's not that you need to go on this massive life adventure and travel the world and do all these things to discover that core belief that's driving everything you do. It's already with you. And so really the goal is to try and look at your experiences, Look at the path that you've been down so far in your life, collect those stories in a way where we can see the common thread. What's that core belief that's driving everything that you do? And both the moments that feel really good, they feel really fulfilling, they bring us joy and excitement, but also those moments where things are hard, the valleys of life, the times where, oh, I don't know if I'm going to get out of this, where you just feel like you're going against the grain and butting heads. And when you start looking at those stories, there's a common theme there. There's a common belief in everything that exists in your life that if we can put language around it, we can now live on purpose from a lens of greater intentionality, instead of just letting this be this invisible thing that's guiding us without us knowing it. It just brings it into our conscious awareness. So my big advice is to sit down and just like my why, right? Stop and think about it. So often we just end up going through the motions and we don't just take the time to just slow down and to think about our own unique purpose and to see the value in it. And I would start by just looking at the stories. And really, the other thing that's a helpful ingredient in this whole thing is to talk it out with someone else. The reality is we have always had this belief with us. And sometimes we don't realize that it's unique to us because we just assume everyone else is doing the same thing.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I'm hearing some really interesting things there, Gary. I want to play back some of what I heard. So yeah. I really love that your why is to help other people find their own why in some respects. So to get them to stop and think and reflect, find their uniqueness, find their purpose. So I love that. When you spoke about writing down the story, the words that you used were all emotive words. They're all about emotion. You spoke about fulfillment. You spoke about joy in terms of the things that may be aligned to someone's personal why. And then you were using words related to stress and, the opposite of enjoyment when you were talking about the things that may be against the person's ingrained purpose and beliefs. What's your reflection on the role of emotion in all of that?
Yeah, we all are emotional beings and our decisions are charged by emotion. And so when we start to actually analyze those emotions and the themes behind them, you're exactly right. That's what's going to point us to that sense of purpose. And so I think it's important to think through those stories through the lens of emotion. If all we're doing is just looking at, these are just, the average things, they don't really excite me. It's just, this is a lot of times that's pointing to the path that you're on, but not always pointing to the uniqueness of who you are. And when we're in that lane, we're going to feel it. And when we're going completely against that lane, we're also going to feel it. And that's not good or bad. It just allows us to have the evidence to point us towards what that purpose actually is. So I think you're spot on there, Mick, that the emotion of those stories is really what we're trying to get behind. Absolutely.
I'm feeling like it's almost like an internalization of the famous Maya Angelou quote about, people may forget what you said, they may forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And what I'm hearing from you is a internal clock looking at that, going, okay, well, when I did this, I felt amazing. I felt like I was making a difference. I felt reward. I felt joy. I felt fulfillment. When I did this, I felt frustrated. I felt stressed. And you're navigating through that. That's what it sounds like to me. The other thing that you mentioned, I think is really important for us to stop and think about, and you've got me thinking deeply about this right now. You spoke about assumptions. The assumption that someone make that, but isn't everyone like that? So these internal feelings that you have about, well, this is what makes me tick. There can be a tendency that someone will assume that that's just normal and everyone feels that way. And maybe we do need to test those assumptions. How would you go about that? How would you go about testing that assumption of, well, I feel like this, but is that how everyone feels?
Mhm. That's where it's important to bring those stories into the outer world and to talk it out with someone else. There's a story out there. It's been attributed to a bunch of different people. It's real short, real brief, but I think it speaks to this idea when we're looking at uniqueness, whether it's purpose, whether it's personality. And it's these two fish swimming down the stream. And they're just swimming along, going with the stream, just swimming along. And one fish turns to the other and says, "How's the water today?" The other fish turns back and says, "What the heck is water?"
Interesting.
And that's what we're really talking about here. When we're looking at our lives, when we're looking at our purpose, when we're looking at our uniqueness, when it comes to personality, it's like the fish surrounded by water. It's all you've ever known. The fish was born in the water. It never jumped out of the water. It's just swimming along in its water. And so it's there. We can see it. We know that the water is real. But because the fish has never experienced the lack of water, jumped out of the water, or had a moment where there was a threat to the water, it doesn't even know it's there. So when we're talking about these assumptions, it's like trying to figure out, what is this water that we're swimming in, right? If you're a fish, you know that you're in the water. If you're a human, we know that we're always surrounded by air. And sometimes you can feel it if the air quality isn't great, and sometimes you can't. But the same thing is true for our uniqueness when it comes to our purpose and our personality. We often have these assumptions that because I believe that we should be in a state of harmony, because I believe that people should be critically thinking, challenging the status quo, like one of the big pillars of what you talk about on this podcast, right? Because I believe those things. Well, doesn't everyone? Well, slow down. If the status quo is important to you, in challenging the status quo is important to rethink what leadership could be, it's probably important to you because not everyone else is doing it, which makes that all the more important for you to live out of, because now that's an essential piece of the puzzle that our world is not getting unless you are operating from that space. So to really slow down, to talk out those stories, to see the value in them, and then lean into them intentionally is exactly what we're talking about.
So absolutely brilliant, Gary. And I've got to reflect on a couple of things there. Love the metaphor and the analogy of the fish. I didn't know where that story was going, and I loved where it finished. That was brilliant. And I'm going to be thinking about that for days now. It's a really great picture that you've done there. And now for the audience, for those that didn't pick it up, did you see that Gary started subtly coaching me on my own purpose? It was very good. Yeah, very good, Gary. And you're right. But the good news is I believe in diversity of thought, right? So yes, I have my strong beliefs and my strong values, but I'm also open-minded enough to, well, in fact, for all of the levels of deep listening, having an open mind, having an open heart to tap into emotion, and having an open will to imagine a different reality. That whilst I'm quite convicted in my beliefs, I still believe in diversity of thought and understanding that other people may think differently. That's absolutely true. Coming back to then the discovery of purpose. So I liked what you described before. Get people to stop, think, write down the different experiences they've had in their life and think about the emotion of fulfillment and joy. What do those two words mean to you? What does joy mean to Gary Williams? What does fulfillment mean to Gary Williams?
Yeah. When you are operating out of your sweet spot, some people talk about it as like the flow state, right? When we're looking at positive psychology, when time is just passing by and you could just be in this state doing it, time flies by, you look at the clock and you're, whoa, hours pass by. I didn't even realize it, because you're in this state where things are just in alignment, right? That's usually an indicator that we're operating from that space of something that's going to give us the fulfillment, give us that joy. I believe fulfillment and joy are an outcome of operating in that zone of fulfillment, that zone of joy comes from that flow state. comes from when we're doing the things that we love, that we're good at, but still give us enough of a challenge to keep us on the edge of our seat, to keep us leaning forward, to keep us engaged in what we're doing. When you're operating from that space, you're going to experience joy and fulfillment as an outcome of those things. And so to start thinking about you uniquely, right? Well, when are those times in your life that you do feel like time has just passed by so quickly? Maybe it's when you're doing a hobby of yours. Maybe you're a musician. Maybe you like to go running or do something active, go for a hike. Maybe it's something tied to your work. Maybe it's behind a computer screen. Maybe you're programming or building a website or designing. Maybe you are crafting something and creating something new. What are those things that you do in your life that you just lose track of time with? And those are the things that are likely going to give us some clues of the core things, the core activities that are going to give you that sense of fulfillment and joy in your life.
Love that, Gary. And once again, you're using great language I've got this great picture of exactly that flow state and what it feels like for me when I get into that mode. What do you think the differences are between fulfillment and joy versus pleasure?
Mm-hmm. To me, fulfillment and joy, they're deep to the soul. It's so uniquely ingrained in who you are. It's that like soul touching activity when you're really operating from that flow state. To me, when I think of pleasure, I think of the shorter term win. Usually I think of more of the dopamine rush, the instant gratification. We could do things that are pleasurable. I may get tons of pleasure out of eating a wonderful dessert. I may get pleasure of having a fun night with friends. But to me, that doesn't really hit the same core, the same part of my identity as when I'm getting people to have an aha moment, as when I'm getting people to realize something new about themselves, about the world that they're operating in. And when I see their face light up and I see their eyeballs widen, I see them start to think and process and nod their head, to me, that is giving me fulfillment. That is my joy. Pleasure is just not as intense. We can do pleasurable things, but it's you may get pleasure out of things that bring you joy and fulfillment, but that's like taking it to the whole next level.
Brilliant. I just love everything that you're saying, Gary. And now I want to bring that together to describe why I was trying to delineate between the two. And I'd like to run something past you and get your thoughts on it. So for everyone out there that's looking for what is my purpose and listening to everything that Gary is saying, pleasure is something that is momentary. It does release dopamine into your brain and you do feel good at that moment, but it has a short half-life. And in fact, it has a decreasing half-life. When you seek pleasurable activities, the more you do that activity, the more you need to do it to get the same level of dopamine release. It is a type of addiction. And we could go into all kinds of things about other types of addictive activities, but pleasure by its nature is addictive. So things like when we say look for things that fulfill you and make you joyful, we're not talking about pleasure. We're not talking about, oh, well, I really like flicking through TikTok. It releases dopamine for me. That is not a purpose, and that is pleasure. When Gary talks about fulfillment and joy, he's talking about things that are long lasting, that you get into that flow state and make you feel good for days and weeks and months afterwards. That is fulfillment and joy, where time seems to stop because you feel that joy and fulfillment that you're making something amazing. You're creating a positive impact in someone else's life, or you're creating something that's going to have some kind of long-term legacy, not short-term pleasure. So when you're doing this exercise that Gary is talking about, to list down the things that you do, you're not looking for pleasure markers. You're looking for fulfillment and joy markers. How does that sound, Gary?
100%. Spot on. And I love your ability to almost put that on a timeline when we're looking at these activities, looking to see, okay, well, what is the shelf life of that emotion and how long does it sit with us? I think that's spot on. And sometimes there can still be clues in the things that may bring you pleasure, but look to see the pattern between those things and those things that you know that are experiencing the fulfillment and joy. You might think that scrolling through TikTok is a flow state activity, and for many people it might be, but what is it about that?
Right.
Is it the emotion that it's bringing you? Is it that you love the educational parts of it? Is it like that the infotainment side of it, right? Like, what are the elements? And there's probably still that deeper theme that's there, but it should be magnified when we're looking at those flow state activities that are going to give us that deeper sense of fulfillment and joy. Absolutely.
Okay, very good. So once someone's gone through that activity, how do they get to a level of clarity about it? So they've done the exercise that you're talking about. How do they get to that deeper level of clarity of what it really means to them?
Yeah. So I believe that the superpower is being able to simplify it down into a statement. And that can be really hard because of the example that we use with the two fish swimming in the water. It's all you've ever known. And to put language around the water can be challenging. And I believe that's where it's helpful to bring it to the outer world, to have a conversation with someone. Maybe it's a coach. Maybe it's a friend of yours, someone who's a really good listener, and someone that's going to be able to listen in to the language that you are using. Because when we're talking about those things that bring us fulfillment and joy, you're going to have unique language around those things. And your purpose statement is rooted in your own language. If the person that's listening is putting it through their own filter and re-articulating it through their experience, now they're clouding your purpose with theirs and their life experience. So we need someone who's a really good listener that's going to be able to help you find that language. And you want them to play back. What are the words that you're repeating? What are the phrases that they're repeating? What are those core themes that you're repeating? And that's where your purpose lives. So to really get it down to clarity, I believe that there's so much power in simplifying it down into one sentence. And that is going to be the thread that ties into everything that you do. And now once you have that, now you can make the choice to actually live on purpose and operate from that space, which we could talk a little bit more about, but I'll pause there in case you have some thoughts already.
I do. That was wonderful, Gary. That was such a good description. I want to talk about that partner that you talk about for a moment. So when you go out there and look for someone to talk this through, whether it be a professional like a coach or just someone that you really trust, listen to some of the things that Gary was saying. You need someone that is going to be mindful, that's going to pay attention and pay attention to what I'm saying here, that's going to really actively listen and listen without judgment. Because this is your narrative, it's not theirs. So listen without judgment. And what do I mean by pay attention? You heard what Gary said. Look for repeated words. That's a good one. Look for adjectives. We can't help ourselves in the way that we formulate sentences. We give signs all the time as to what is most important to us through the adjectives that we use or whether we repeat statements. And the other part is body language. Our whole posture can change when we get onto something that's particularly emotive for us. So if you're going to pick someone to have this conversation with, I actually would recommend a professional, by the way. Coaches are trained on exactly how to do this active listening approach and listening without judgment. But if you're going to pick someone else that you trust, make sure that they are doing exactly that, listening without judgment and paying attention to all of the senses, what you're saying, how you're saying it, and your body language throughout. Really good one, Gary. When we get to the purpose statement, once someone has that, what do they do with it?
So there's all sorts of things that you can do with it, but really once you have your statement, it's up to you to live from that space. The beautiful thing about purpose, a lot of people, when they think about purpose, they think about Simon Sinek. And Simon Sinek talks about the golden circle. He says, start with why, which is that core belief, that purpose that you're living out of, then move to the how, which is the process, and the what. And one of the things that he outlines in his TED Talk, if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out because it's related to what we're talking about, how great leaders inspire action. Okay. And it's available out there on TED. He talks about your what can literally be anything in the world. When you know your why and you're operating from that core belief, you can do anything. This isn't to put you in a box and say, well, now you must be in this profession. You must be an engineer. You must be a teacher. No, we're talking about the core belief. And so it is an intentional choice of how you are going to show up in what you do. It doesn't tell you what to do. It shows you how you're going to intentionally make the choice to show up. And when you're operating from that space, that's when you're going to start experiencing that joy. So when I work with my clients through their purpose statement, I always give them homework. One of the homework assignments is to reflect on it daily for at least 7 days straight. Once we have the purpose statement, journal about it, talk it out with someone, like whatever's natural for you, but intentionally reflect on it for 7 days to make sure that it fits. So you can start intentionally seeing the patterns and how it shows up in the micro moments throughout our days as well. Because guess what? It does. It's not just in those huge peaks and valleys. That's the language that we're going to use to find it and craft it, but it shows up in everything that you do throughout your day-to-day life. So that's one homework I'm going to give. The second one is to find a way to remember it. Sometimes that's a physical symbol in your house. For me, it's maybe a little cheesy, but I have it painted on a canvas in my house. It's an easy visual reminder. For some people, it's having it as a sticky note on their bathroom mirror so they see it every single day. Every time you walk in the bathroom, it may be a little frame on your desk, something that's going to keep you rooted in your purpose because you will forget. There's going to be days where it's hard. There's going to be days where it's just so much easier to just go through the motions of life. I'm not saying a purpose statement is going to be the end all be all solution for all things in your life. In fact, it can sometimes make things harder because when you know what that belief is, you now have to wake up every day and make the choice. Am I going to choose to show up and serve from this place? Or am I just going to kind of go through the motions and just kind of get through the day, which we sometimes do. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I believe our world becomes better when we're intentionally making the choice to operate from our sense of purpose each and every day.
Yeah, I can hear you there, Gary. I think that once you find that purpose, it helps you make clearer decisions about what you say yes to, about what you say no to. But yeah, there's an element of it also requires energy, and you talk a lot about energy in your book. It does require energy, and some days you just want to chill. Yeah, I get that. So I like the idea about the reminders. I want to come back to Simon for a moment. So far, we've spoken a lot about individual purpose. And later on, we're going to talk about individual uniqueness as well and personality types. But we've spoken a lot about individual purpose. Some of the key messages in Simon's talk are about how leaders inspire people into great action and into meaningful action. So others inspire others. And then he speaks a lot about buying behavior. So people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So in some respects, we're now talking about followers and we're talking about the outer world again, right? So we're talking about inner purpose, but now we're talking about the impact on the outer world. What's your view about how this goes from the individual to the collective?
So the beautiful thing about that is we all have that unique sense of purpose. And a lot of times we naturally gravitate towards people and organizations who believe what we believe, which is one of the claims that Simon Sinek does make. And what's interesting is sometimes there is a clash between people's core purpose, where it can feel like those values rubbing up against each other. And that sometimes means that we have to make a choice. Do we stay? Do we find a way to adapt within the organization? What does that look like? It also can happen in our families, in our relationships, in our communities, in our friendships. Those purpose statements can sometimes butt up against each other. They can also build each other up and to find people who believe things that are similar to you, that have a similar enough worldview where you're going to bring each other up. I think what's beautiful about it is you can use your purpose statement in so many different ways. I've had plenty of clients choose to use their purpose statement as part of their personal brand. If they're a coach, an entrepreneur, a solopreneur, if they're starting their own business, to use that statement to really put out there in the world, this is who I am, this is what I believe, and this is what I'm on mission for, greater than the products and services that I offer. And so when we're thinking about the collective, whether it's in an organization or community, to intentionally have that purpose out there so that people do know what you believe, and you're going to attract those right people into your world, whether it's through a business transaction and relationship or a relationship that you're building in your personal life, they're going to be embedded. But to allow that to be clearly articulated can really expedite the process to strengthen and deepen those relationships.
Yeah, really great, Gary. Let me play something to you. I want to test something with you and get your views on this at the end, because we are talking about some balancing elements here. So what you're hearing from Gary is to intentionally tell the outer world about your purpose, about your vision, your purpose, your values and beliefs. There are many organizations that are complaining at the moment, understandably, that they find it difficult sometimes to attract and retain the right talent. Part of what Gary is saying is by getting out there and openly declaring your vision, your purpose, your values and beliefs, you are going to attract and retain people that have similar vision, purpose, values and beliefs, whether it's you as an individual, a personal brand, or whether it's your organization. That is what's going to happen as a result of that. Where the balance is where people will start getting potentially confused. And I want to clarify something. If you surround yourself with people that are just like you, then that's not very diverse. So you're not really encouraging diversity and inclusion. So what I want to put to you, Gary, and get your view back on this, what we're talking about is being very clear about vision, purpose, values, and beliefs. However, to achieve that vision, there are always multiple ways to get there. So where the diversity of thought comes in is to get people together that believe in the common purpose, but have diverse views about how you might get there. And then you can still have diversity, you can still have inclusion, you can still embrace all of that innovation that comes from diversity of thought, that everyone is heading to the same North Star, but everyone has a different view about how to get there, and you collect those ideas together to find the way. Your thoughts?
100%. Now that's assuming that the organization does indeed value that diversity of thought, which isn't always the case. And so you want to make sure that that is the truth of who you are and what you believe and what you stand for. And so, Mick, I know by your heart and your posture and the diversity of the interviews that you've had on this podcast, that that's true for you. Yeah. And so for you and the organization and the people that you lead, 100%. Unfortunately, it's not always the reality in all organizations. And so you need to operate authentically, because if you're putting words out there that you think you're supposed to use, or the right words, and if you're listening to the podcast, I'm using air quotes when I say supposed to and right, like the words that you think are socially acceptable right now, so that we're going to survive as a business because everyone's talking about diversity and inclusion. I'm supposed to be diverse and inclusive. And so I'm going to put that on my website. Yeah. But then when you get in the organization, and if that's not the day-to-day reality, it's going to cause greater harm. Mm. And so to find the things that you truly do believe in and the precise language to make sure that you are representing your organization authentically is where the power lies. And that to me is more important than using the words that you're supposed to be using according to the world standards or whatever the current buzzwords might be, because now your organization is going to be living and breathing in a really healthy way, internally and externally.
So good, Gary. And it leads me to a question that I now must ask you and see where this takes us. People talk about one of the attributes in a leader that they most look for is trust. What do you think the connection is between vision, purpose, values, and beliefs, and trust.
The first word that popped in my head was alignment. When those words, vision, mission, purpose, your core beliefs, those words are in alignment with the day-to-day evidence. And so if you're talking about an individual as a leader, if you're talking about trust within an organization and an executive leadership team, when the day-to-day reality is in alignment with what you say, now there's no longer this cognitive dissonance between the words that we're using and the actions that are out there in the world. There's alignment. Who we say we are is who we are. And this is how we're going to act. This is how we're going to move. And it gives the people around you enough predictability to be able to know, okay, this is how we do it. This is how things are done around here. This is truly what we believe in. This is the cause that we're fighting for. This is the world that we're trying to create through whatever product or service or vision that we have for the world. But when we say one thing and we show up in another way, now there's so much unpredictability and so much uncertainty that now your team, your clients, whoever it is that you're doing life with is going to retract a bit and say, I don't really know what to expect here. So I'm hearing one thing, I'm seeing another. And now there's going to be that lack of trust where it's like, I don't know. I don't know what to do. So I think the core there is that sense of alignment in the words that you're using, how you show up on the day-to-day, and allowing that to foster really healthy relationships.
Brilliant, Gary. So when your actions align with your stated values and beliefs, you build trust. As soon as the opposite is the case, it erodes trust very quickly. Yeah, very, very well said, Gary.